Welcome to this episode of the People Dividend with Mike Horne. I am absolutely delighted today to have in our virtual studio, and for those of you on YouTube watching, Dr. Lee C. Cordell. And in part, I am so honored to have Dr. Cordell because she is the first person of this type I have met. She is a certified clinical trauma professional nurse practitioner. I know a little bit about nurse practitioners and the training, the education that's necessary. So to have these additional credentials around becoming a certified clinical trauma professional nurse practitioner, I'm absolutely delighted for that. And in addition to that credentialing, she's also the CEO and founder of the Institute for Trauma and Psychological Safety. Dr. Cordell, and we'll call her Lee for the purposes of our podcast, or Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee has 20 years of expertise in healthcare, organizational leadership, adult education, neurobiopsychology, and nursing. She's highly competent in speaking to groups in excess of 500, and I bet that number even goes higher. And she's been a guest on numerous podcast summits supporting change in large organizations. And I can't imagine an organization that's not affected by some trauma today or has a member of it affected by trauma in some way. And we'll talk about what trauma means and all of that. Dr. Cordell has a fascinating mission, and that mission is to empower leaders in the development of highly trusted, inclusive, and psychologically safe organizations for customers and employers alike. So welcome, Dr. Lee Cordell, to the People Dividend. Again, so delighted to have you. Can you say a few words about yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. Thank you. That might be the best introduction I've ever had the pleasure of receiving on a podcast. So thank you for that.
Wonderful.
So a little bit about me personally. I'm a mom of three, teens, and I've been married for nearly 20 years to a man who also has the same name as me. He's also Lee, and I like to share those two
Lee
things
Cordell?
because
Same surname?
He's Timothy Lee Cordell the second. He's always gone by Lee though, so we get into fake arguments about who the real Lee is. And
maybe when the bills come.
I know. Yes. Oh yeah. I'm gonna be like, here you go, babe. That's for you.
Right.
Yes. And I like to share that because in addition to those being the parts of me that people don't always see, I'm also a neurodivergent human. So I have an ADHD diagnosis and went through some really significant trauma as a child that led to, almost 3 decades of panic disorder, anxiety, depression, and really not understanding what was going on in my body. In addition to, going through school, becoming highly educated, working as an acute care nurse practitioner, seeing a lot of trauma. And so for me, the work that I do, while it's, it's professional in nature, it's also deeply personal because a lot of what fuels me to do what I do is the things that have happened to me in my past.
Well, I'm so sorry to hear about the past trauma and so grateful that you're able to make something of that, to do something with that. It's so wonderful because in many ways, I believe that, the key to a happy life is having a relatively happy childhood. And I'm so curious about how the applications that you're making at work today and in helping others. But let's start with the basic question, Lee,
Sure.
which is, what is trauma?
Oh, my favorite. Now, I could talk about this for hours, so I'm going to give you my 60-second spiel. Really, I think it is helpful to take what we traditionally think about as trauma as this very serious or significant event that has long-lasting negative consequences and broaden it up a little bit Because when we look at trauma through that traditional lens, about 20 to 25% of people would say, yeah, I have trauma. I've had something serious or significant happen. When we broaden the lens out and really look at it, is anything that is subjectively serious and significant, meaning it doesn't have to be significant or serious to you as long as it was serious and significant to me. And so when we add in that personalization of what the experience meant to us, how we made sense of the experience, how we moved through the experience, when we do that, it really helps us see that the vast majority of humans who are alive have had at least one instance of trauma, whether they realize it or not. And I have yet to meet somebody that when we, get into it, they go, oh yeah, I don't have any trauma. And then, 5 to 10 minutes later, we're having a conversation and they go, oh, okay, wait, maybe I do. So, really, this can be anything from as a young child, like the loss of a pet, the loss of a loved one, human. This can be a significant move. This can be a sudden job change. It's really anything unexpected that, when we move through that acute state, there's still some residue on the other side of it that is leaving us in a more negative or more affected state than we would hope.
You also, in your introduction, you introduced yourself, I believe, as a neurodiverse person.
Yes.
That's the right language, right? Neurodiverse person. Is there a relationship between neurodiversity and trauma?
Absolutely. So I think if you drew a Venn diagram between neurodiversity, what we refer to as PTSD or complex PTSD, so like post-traumatic stress disorder, and a lot of other mental health disorders, nervous disorders, anxiety, depression, there's a significant overlap in the middle of most of those. And from a symptom perspective. And so sometimes I'll have clients come to me and they're like, yeah, I've been told I have ADHD and now I'm medicated, or I've been told that maybe I'm autistic and that's what's going on. And when we get underneath of there, it's not sometimes it is more of a quote unquote nurture thing where they were born with a brain that works the way that it does. And sometimes it's, hey, when you were a kid, you had some really chronic, significant things happen to you that changed the way your brain developed. And so now, as an adult, the way your ability to really use your executive functioning skills, your memory, your processing, all of those things are slightly different because your nervous system didn't have the chance to develop the same way that the average child does.
And so, on this topic of trauma, why should organizational leaders care about it? Many of the folks in our listening audience are leaders of some sort. And I mean beyond the everyday exercise of leadership. They have positions of power, influence, directing others. Why care about this?
I thank you for asking that, because what I have found is that when our nervous systems have past painful experiences that they have undergone, it changes the way that they work in any stressful situation, particularly those stressful situations that are similar to the ones that we went through in the past. So here's a prime example. You may be a C-suite exec who feels confident and competent, and you love your job, and you go into the boardroom one day and you sit down and somebody in front of you says, hey, you made a mistake and we really got to talk about this. Now, some people may hear that and go, okay, cool. Other people, if they have a significant experience where someone in their life caused a good amount of emotional trauma, where this person never validated your experiences, or if you used to get into a lot of scenarios when you were a child where shame was put on you for making mistakes, where you were taught that mistakes were dangerous. The response that's going to happen in your body is what we refer to as a trauma response. Your body is going, hey, remember when we were 6 and dad yelled at us like that? And then like that really bad thing happened. This reminds us of that. React the same way. So you're showing up there as your, in your suit and your tie, and you're like, I'm a leader and I'm in this adult body. And at the same time, your 6-year-old self is sitting there at the board table with you. And guess what? Your 6-year-old just took over your brain.
Yes.
So the decisions you're going to make from that place are now not logical, rational, reasonable decisions. They are emotional decisions based on a trauma response. And so if you've ever had somebody act unexpectedly in a meeting, or have an employee yell when you thought that they would stay calm, or have them, not answer messages when you expected them to respond, or you had somebody people please when you would have expected them to stand up for themselves, all of those are trauma responses. So it is so important for us as leaders to understand that when people walk into a space with you, they are bringing every single experience that they have had up until that moment into that space. And so they may not be reacting based on what's happening right in front of them. They may be reacting based on something that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so knowing how to respond to that in a way that is kind and compassionate, and the word we use is attuned, like you are there with them and you are present with them, that can make all the difference in how that interaction goes.
I often say to clients, as a way of building inclusion, the first and easiest technology we have to build inclusion is to say hello. And perhaps the second is to be present. Often, if I'm an executive in a big corporation, someone's coming to me that I may know well or I may not know well. I usually don't know what happened to them 5 minutes before they walked into my office. Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen to them 5 minutes after they leave my office. So this ability to be present seems so important if we want to develop authentic and trusting relationships. And I wonder, given your observation that many people are affected by trauma, and therefore our organizations have many people affected by trauma, it means they're showing up in our workplaces. And it may not just be an outburst here or an incident there.
Yeah.
So I get why we care about trauma as an organizational leader. If we care about productivity, if we care about happiness, which may be a great indicator of productivity. What does it mean to be a trauma-sensitive organization then? If we sort of elevate it beyond the personal level, the leadership level, and think about it organizationally, what would a trauma-sensitive organization be?
Oh, so a trauma-sensitive organization, there's different levels to this, okay? So a trauma-aware organization is an organization that goes, okay, we understand that trauma happens and people bring their past selves with them to the present moment. What a trauma-sensitive organization does is says, we understand not just that happens, we understand how it happens, and we can see where it happens. So an example of this is, okay, we understand that at customer service, when a client or a customer is trying to return something and they start yelling at the cashier, it probably has very little to do with the cashier. It has to do with something about this interaction and what it is triggering inside of their nervous system, right? Yes. So if we can make this more of or less of a what's wrong with this human in front of me that they feel like it's okay to yell at somebody that they don't even know, and more of a wow, okay, this person's having an emotional reaction. What do I do about this? That shifts it's going to shift every decision that we make from that point forward, because we're moving from a place of curiosity instead of a place of assumption.
Right.
So
what a great observation, moving from a place of curiosity, moving to a place of curiosity from a place of assumption.
Yeah.
It's a great takeaway for all of us in the listening audience.
Well, and I like to encourage organizations, if you can get to that point, that's amazing. Even just being able to pause and go, okay, what assumptions or judgments am I making here? And to take that moment and then to drop into presence with that person in front of you, that's going to have a huge shift. And there's one more step beyond this, and we refer to this as trauma responsiveness. And trauma responsiveness is, I actually know I'm equipped and have the skills to be able to tell if this person getting upset has activated or triggered me, and I know how to bring myself back to a more regulated state. And I have the skills to be able to interact with this person in a way that ups the likelihood that they are able to come down and be more regulated as well. And it is a skill that I find a lot of leaders intuitively have. And there are certain scenarios where they're really good at just innately going in and acting in that trauma responsive way. And then there's certain scenarios based on their own past experiences where they really struggle to show up in that responsive nature. So being able to just get more input and information, awareness around what's going on in you, and go, okay, these are the places that I struggle to respond in this sensitive manner, and here's the places that I have an easier time. We can develop those skills. We can become better in those areas that are weaker, and we can really play to those strengths in the areas that we know we're good. So if someone else is like, hey, I'm struggling and I need a tap in, you can step in knowing that that's a place that you have an easier time being responsive.
And it's so great. I mean, I think since Amy Edmondson's pioneering work in psychological safety and creating psychologically safe organizations, there's certainly a lot of banter around this. One of the things that you did at the beginning of today's episode of the People Dividend with Mike Horne is that you had an appropriate amount of self-disclosure. You said, I'm this, I'm a mom of a mother to 3 children. It immediately creates some sort of connection, I think, that, rather than seeing, any event as an element of production, let's get this done, it humanizes our experience. And that's a way, I think, of creating these trauma-sensitive organizations, is to humanize experience.
Yeah.
And you did that so well. What a great demonstration.
Oh, thank you so much. It's when people feel like they can resonate with you and you get them. So both they get you and you get them. That's 2 different processes, by the way, right? Them feeling like they can see into you and you feeling like you can see into them. Both of those are necessary for true connection and like an authentic creation of trust. And so one of my favorite things to do when I have somebody in front of me that's upset, and I used to try to, as a leader and as a mom, I think that's probably the place that I lead the most is as a mom. I used to try to quickly fix things because I saw myself as the person in charge going, okay, well, this person's coming to me with a problem. They're having an emotional reaction. It's my job to fix the thing. And instead, what I've started doing is just simply validating their experience. And it feels too easy at times. So if I have a colleague or a team member come up and they're having that experience, to go, oh man, you know what? I can only imagine how angry you're feeling right now. Like if I were in your shoes, I would be so frustrated too, because I've experienced things like this in the past, or I could say I haven't experienced things like that. And I can only imagine. There's something about that where I almost imagine we're in this discourse where we're standing across from one another. And by saying that, what I do is I come around the side of the table and I sit next to you and I'm like looking at it with you going, oh yeah, like from your perspective, it makes total sense that you're sad, frustrated, angry, whatever emotion you're having. I can sense that that's what I would feel too. And it's this ability to go, hey, like I see you and what you're experiencing is valid. That is another very simple tool that can make a massive difference as a leader.
I'm curious, and I'm naive on this topic of trauma.
Yeah.
And just in terms of helping our audience to understand it, the range of trauma. I might hear someone describe, I'm traumatized by watching television news.
Yeah.
And someone who suffers, witnesses shooting, an execution.
Yeah.
I've had colleagues, who saw one of their family members shot in front of them.
Yeah.
I go, okay, that's real trauma.
Uh-huh.
What about this other stuff around, I'm traumatized by watching the news?
Right.
Help me figure that out.
Sure. Okay. So we use the examples of sledgehammers and paper cuts. So what you just talked about with a family member, being hurt or harmed directly in front of you, that's a sledgehammer. There's a very clear, okay, my life was like this before this moment, and my life is very different after this moment. And there's going to be a lot of potential negative consequences moving forward. So those are the things that we typically think of around trauma. The paper cuts, imagine if, I was in your studio with you and I said, hey, Mike, here's the notes for today. And I handed them to you and I gave you a paper cut. You probably wouldn't be very angry at me. You probably wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, Lee's out to get me. I can't believe she did that. And besides maybe washing your hands or using hand sanitizer later in the day, you probably wouldn't notice it. It's a very minor thing. Now, imagine you every day for a year, I walk into your studio and I hand you a piece of paper. And the first, 100 days, I give you a paper cut in the same location every single time. How do you think you're going to start reacting to me? How do you think you're going to start? Do you think you're going to become maybe afraid of paper? Maybe you become afraid of Lee. Maybe you become afraid of taking anything I hand to you.
Going to the studio.
Right. Going to the studio. So all of a sudden there's some negative consequences or negative associations that are created in your brain around this experience. So it could be, it could shift your beliefs around yourself. It could shift your beliefs around me. It could, in our relationship, it could shift your beliefs around the world. So what we know is that anything that, as we move into the future, continues to feel like a paper cut and continues to kind of fester and become a bigger thing, those little things add up. And so paper cuts can be particularly traumatic for people who've already had sledgehammers in the past. So seeing something on the news that reminds you of a sledgehammer from the past, well, it could be a paper cut for someone else. And for you, it just completely shifted your world again. So, I think that some of what our society responds to as trauma isn't necessarily traumatic within itself. And even if people, this is something I have to remind myself of, even if somebody is showing up in front of me and saying, hey, this really hurt me, and objectively, it doesn't look like they're hurt, validating their pain without necessarily buying into their story is still a kind, compassionate, helpful thing to do. So I don't have to tell them that they're right, that they were hurt. And I don't have to, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I don't have to do that. I can say, wow, I'm hearing that felt really hurtful. I'm witnessing you in that.
So it's working in the moment. The colleague that I referred to with the family member that was harmed, fatally harmed in front of him, wrote a wonderful book. Joseph Almond wrote a wonderful book about his experience called Better Not Bitter. And it provided, I think, some wonderful insight into certainly his experience and how that was shaping at the time that he wrote it, his life. So, consequently, we can see a great impact about being sensitive as a leader to issues of trauma. And I have to assume there's a correlation to, financial success, other measures of success that organizations use, depending on the skill of leaders to do it. But if you were to offer, 3 things that leaders can do to help their employees and customers feel safe and more supported, what would you tell them right off the bat, Dr. Cordell?
Sure. Well, one of my top things when I go into an organization is I look at all of the places that we are taking away choice that is not necessary. So giving your employees as much choice as possible is incredibly helpful from a trauma experience, because most people, their past traumas, they were situations in which their choice was taken away. So anytime when we can validate, hey, you get to choose here. And I think erring on the side of giving them a little too much choice is actually better than erring on the side of giving them too little, because you can always rein it in. If you see some issues, it's harder to give more collectively. Now, I would say the second... What do you want to have
for lunch? And it's too big for some people. It might be better to say you want Chinese or Indian today. I mean, that's an example, not to undercut or devalue anything that you've said, but it's an example, I think, about possibilities and choice. And certainly, my experience, even in those situations, is that it does include people in a different way. Just to say, what is it? A, B, or wide open?
Yeah, I know that one of the biggest issues, or one of the biggest conversations we're having, as at the organizational level right now, is the return to work and the can I work virtually? And as a neurodivergent human, and with a lot of neurodivergent humans in our space, I'll tell you, is there are some humans that when given the choice, their productivity level is going to be so much higher based on their ability to choose their work environment. And so I think that that's a really great place for potential for us moving forward, now that we know how to create a variety of work environments for people to come into. So I think
you're so right. We're going to get to the other 2 points. I mean, this first point that you're introducing is the element of choice. Just picking up on your ideas about, return to work. What I notice in my client systems, and perhaps in general, is that it's mostly men who are beating their chest about get people back in the office. And what my chief people officers are concerned with and what they're dealing with is the advent of the 4-day work week in the United States. It's going to happen. So this element about, if in the absence of trust, doesn't matter if you work a 10-day week, a 7-day week. With trust, I'm going to get as much from you as a 4-day week. That it is, it's driven. So what a great point, particularly as it relates to trauma. What's the second things that leaders can do? Offer choice. Love it.
Yeah. The second one is based on another core need that we have, which is psychological safety. We need to feel like we're important, like we belong, like we matter. And honestly, I've been a member of organizations that have said that before, that the walk didn't match the talk. And what I would say is, I would rather have a company never say that to me than have a company say that to me and not walk the talk. So if you are going to say things like, we are a family, you matter, you belong, you're included, then I need to see as an employee tangible opportunity for my feedback, for my opinion to matter. And, you asking me about my kid's soccer game on Sunday because you remember, because we talked about it, or you saying, hey, I know you've got that thing, like, why don't you take off 20 minutes early if that's possible? Those type of things make a huge difference. when it allows people to bring more of their full selves into the workplace. And if I can bring my full self in and be accepted, I'm going to work so much more intently in my job because it becomes part of my positive identity.
Willing to exercise more discretionary effort. I mean, that's, I guess, how, we might say it in some parlance, which creates engagement. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's this idea about belongingness, about you matter here. And for leaders then to be authentic, to have some alignment between what they say and what they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Choice, belongingness. What's topic 3?
Yeah. So the third one is physical safety. And so when we look at physical safety from a needs perspective, we think about it in terms of resources. So we use the acronym TIME. So T is for time, I is for information, M is for money, and E is for energy. And so if you can have conversations with your direct reports, with the people that you are, charged with leading and supporting and really understanding from a resource perspective where they feel well-resourced and where they feel under-resourced and which resources they value the most, then you're going to be able to really support this person in increasing their capacity, both in the workplace and outside of the workplace. So, for example, one of the big ones is time. So if you have a team where the time resource is really big and we've got a bunch of meetings where people, it's nice to have them there and they're not necessarily contributing much to the meeting, can we give people the opportunity to say, hey, I think that my time would be much better resourced over here. And if you don't agree with that, let's have a conversation about it. But can the person speak up and say, you've said that this is a priority and choosing between the meeting and this other task you've given me that you've prioritized, like I'm not going to be able to do both. So is there room around here? Now notice that one is based also in choice. So does this person have the ability to, from an agency perspective, say, hey, I would like to make this choice? And the person's going to have to feel safe enough bringing this to you. So we're going to have to foster this culture of psychological safety where somebody says, hey, you've said this is important to you. And I feel safe enough pointing out that what you're having me do is actually taking me away from the important thing. So they all really go together.
So it's time, information, money, energy.
Yeah.
And all four so important in creating these physically safe work environments for people. So it was once, as people define generations, veterans, millennials, boomers. I read one article that suggested that, a particular title or label for people born in a post-Twin Towers world was being defined by a sense of security. Can I be safe when I go to work anymore? Can I be safe when I go to school? And there's so many instances where this is not true for people anymore.
Yeah, it's very true. And that's sometimes the employees or the customers that are walking through your doors are so under-resourced and you cannot see that by looking at them. So the expectation that they're going to be able to perform or be productive to the level of other employees is an unfair expectation to put on people without knowing where they're starting. So I always love to really, when we bring someone new on team, it's a question of, hey, sometimes people feel like they've got a lot of time and they don't have a lot of energy. So it's, all right, what are you going to need in order to help you maximize your resources and show up in a way that feels the best for you while also getting the job done?
Absolutely. And I have two more questions and then we'll wrap up the interview, Dr. Cordell. One question will be, okay, so how does a leader he, her, themselves incorporate practical self-care into
Oh,
usually an overpacked agenda, an overpacked calendar. And then we'll begin to close up by thinking about, okay, here's how I incorporate some practical care into a busy calendar. And then wrapping up with thinking about, well, okay, how do I do this quickly? Because I don't have a lot of
yeah.
time.
Oh, yes. Right. That is one of our most precious resources these days is time. Uh, so actually our trauma-informed self-care talk is the talk that I'm asked to give across the board in the most places. And there are three pieces to trauma-informed self-care. And really, it's the first one is nurturing. And so a lot of times we think of as an adult nurturing, like, oh, well, I don't need nurtured. That's a kid thing. Again, let's remember the inner 6-year-old you have that shows up at the board meetings with you sometimes. So um, the nurture is, am I caring for myself? Am I being kind and compassionate to myself? And also, am I making sure that those physical needs, am I treating myself like a plant? Am I watering myself? Am I feeding myself? Am I getting my eyeballs on the sun at least once a day? Or maybe putting my feet in the grass? And am I, speaking kindly to myself? And those seem really simple. And I have watched so many leaders, and I've struggled with this personally, like getting in 60 ounces of water a day is a Herculean feat sometimes with how many meetings and things are going on. So really prioritizing that nurture piece is huge. The second piece is guidance. And I think when we get to certain levels, sometimes we forget that we are allowed to ask other people questions and we're allowed to ask for help. We're allowed to say, I don't know this thing, or this is something that's new to me, or I got to go Google this. And so for me, really being clear on the mentors that I have in my life that I can go to for specific things, and ensuring that I use them and that I use my access to them in a way that allows me to show up and be a better leader. And so, it might be your partner in some places, or your parents. It could be another, a colleague, anyone who, when you go to them, you know that they're going to provide that guidance. And my favorite person to ask guidance from is my future self. So I will say, okay, I'm about to make this choice. In 3 months from now, how is future Lee going to feel about this? And I get a lot of surprising answers when I ask that question, because trauma tells us to make decisions that help us in the now. It's very urgent. A more regulated, intentional decision-making process tells us to make decisions that may be uncomfortable in the now and support us in the later. So that's the second one. And then the third one is boundaries. And so really getting clear on what are your needs and where are the places that you are unwilling, or it's harmful to you to be in relationship or be in connection with other people, and being really clear about that. So, my clients know they can message me 24/7 in Slack. They can send me an email at any time, and I'm going to respond when I have the capacity to respond within 12 hours. And if they haven't heard from me in 12 hours, they know that they can just send a little like hello emoji, and it'll bump the message back up top. And they learn really quickly, like I can contact her at any point because I know she's going to honor her boundaries around when she's online and when she's not. And so I also encourage my clients and my team to create those same boundaries and to turn off notifications and to let everyone know what those boundaries are so that we can honor them as well. So those are the three things. And to do that quickly, I simply ask myself in the moment, like, what do I need from a nurturing perspective? What do I need from a guidance perspective? What do I need from a boundaries perspective? And just taking that 1 to 2 minutes to really check in with myself and see what those needs are. I'm not necessarily going to be able to implement or execute on them immediately. And if I'm like, wow, I've stayed up late the last 3 nights, like I really got to go to bed early tonight, I can go ahead and text my husband and say, hey, I got to be in bed by 9 p.m. Like, are you able to support me in that? Yeah. Are you able to support me in that? And he'll say, absolutely. Right. And then I've gone ahead and like, I'm not putting myself to bed right then. And I've set myself up for success.
Boy, it's so wonderful to have this guide to think about how we can handle and incorporate practical self-care into our leadership style and to develop this quickly and effectively. You reminded me, yesterday I had a colleague, a coaching client, who is experiencing trauma at work. And like you, I make a guarantee to my clients that I'm available. During the course of an engagement, I'm available to you. Call me, text me, we'll figure it out. And I thought, one of the most important items that I took out of that was to say, if someone in your company is telling you who you can and cannot speak with, maybe it's time to look somewhere else.
Right.
Maybe it's time to look somewhere else. And I want to thank Dr. Lee Cordell, a specialist in trauma and the applications to organizations. If I was to create 3 headlines for today's podcast about Dr. Lee Cordell, it would be insightful, refreshing, and your go-to speaker for 2024. I mean, this is a topic that is going to continue to permeate our workplaces. We need more intelligence in this. It's not going to be found out through AI, but you will be able to gain some insight through a meeting, through a consultation, through a strategy session with Dr. Lee C. Cordell. And you can find her at that very website, which we'll have in the show notes, leeccordell.com. And, I would encourage everyone also to visit the institutefortrauma.com.
Yes.
To visit Dr. Lee Cordell and learn more about her programs and her approaches. It's been a delight to have Lee Cordell as a guest on the People Dividend with Mike Horne. And Lee, if you were to offer one parting piece of wisdom for our audience for the remainder of 2024, what would it be?
Slow down, and just really practice some intentionality this year, because this is a pivotal year, and how you approach things. I promise you, if you slow down, the dividends, pardon the pun, but the dividends on the back end are going to be much higher and in a much more positive direction if you move intentionally.
Thank you. That is the People Dividend. So once again, thank you, Dr. Lee Cordell. And until the next episode of the People Dividend with Mike Horne, stay well.